I'm Thao, the founder of the Journey Note, and today I would like to explore a question that I've asked myself so many times in my early 20s, and I'm sure some of you have as well. What do we actually want in life? To help us explore it, I'm joined by Helen Oliver, a certified life coach from the UK. Helen, welcome and thank you for joining me today.
Hello, Tao. Thank you for inviting me. I've been coaching primarily since 2001, and I work mostly online, but I've also done some face-to-face coaching. I have a background in communications, and I'm also a teacher.
Amazing. Love all your experience, Helen, and thank you again for joining me today. So let's dive right in, shall we? Helen, why do so many of us struggle with knowing what we actually want? What are some of the common blocks that you see from your coaching experience?
I think probably that probably is two questions. So I think it can be difficult for us to know what we want, and that is, by the way, a really universal problem. Most of us at some point in our lives think, I need to go get what I want. I'm looking for success. I'm looking for happiness. Oh, but what actually does that look like? And I think there's a few reasons. One of them is that human beings, we live in groups. We're social. We're not okay on our own. Generally, we need to be with others. So society often rewards conformity more highly than it rewards authenticity. In fact, sometimes doing what feels authentic to us can mean stepping outside of what's expected of us, perhaps asking challenging questions or querying hierarchy. And that can be a really risky thing to do. We can feel like, well, that's not how I'm a good person. A good person plays along and follows the rules of the group. So it can be really difficult to even give ourselves permission to think about what we really want. I think also that ties into the next reason, which is we don't want to be selfish.
Mhm.
So, I mean, because really most of us don't. Most of us really want to participate. We think of others, and that actually brings us a degree of happiness. To be selfish would make us feel bad and feel unhappy. But it can mean that we then don't have much of a conversation with what I like to call our internal compass. So, one of the questions I often ask people if they come to coaching and say, I know I need to make a change, but I don't really know what I want. I hear a lot of the expression, and I know you and I have talked about this before, I should do this, I should do that. And I think that's where people aren't necessarily making time and space to consult their own internal compass. What's my north? What's important to me? What direction am I facing? Because they've been busy thinking about their duties and responsibilities. And to be honest, I mean, that makes them a good person, right? So it can be really difficult to be a good person and also to prioritize pondering our internal compass.
Ron, I think for myself, I feel the same as well sometimes. So I can definitely resonate with everything that you have said. When someone is stuck and asking themselves, what do I want? Then what are the frameworks or questions you usually guide your clients through? Like, can you give us 2 to 3 examples that you use with your clients to help them figure out what they really want?
Definitely. So after I've asked that quite big question, I have a few sort of more pondering questions that I like to ask people. And one of them very much is, when was the last time you consulted your internal compass?
Mm.
Um, and the other thing I like to do is say, so if I just ask you now what your current goals are, I want you to just pick one. So maybe Thao, do you have a current goal?
I think my current goal is going to be a better version of myself. Is that a general one, or I have to do like have a more specific one?
No, no. Well, the whole thing is people often come with really
Mhm.
general goals, and it's the job of the coach to
Mhm.
help someone because those general goals, they're authentic and they're real. Just because
Mm.
someone comes with a really big ticket item that's non-specific, it doesn't mean they haven't thought about it, and it doesn't mean that that's not absolutely accurate.
Mm.
I guess that a coach's job is to help the coachee unpick. So
Mm.
we're unpicking what it would mean to be a better version of yourself. I would start off by asking, so what do you already like about yourself? So have a look at what someone already feels comfortable doing. But sometimes I like to whittle it down even more specifically than that and say, that goal, does that feel authentic to you? Does it feel like you're doing your duty? Does it make you feel like you're doing a good thing? And they're kind of three different questions. And if we were having a coaching conversation right now, I would get you to ponder each of those questions separately, because sometimes what emerges is what people think they should do, what they think means being a good person might be a little bit different than what they really want to do. That doesn't mean that when we do what we want to do, we're being a bad person. It's just that, as we said before, we're social animals. We have families. We like to belong to communities. Most of us, even if we don't love our job, actually enjoy doing a good job and being a good colleague. And sometimes it can be really difficult to get the balance between those external expectations and our internal wants.
I'm just wondering, when we do this exercise, should we think about our own personal values as well?
Definitely. And sometimes you ask someone what their important values are, and they really already know that.
Mm,
Other times they know that, but they're not sure how that would manifest in some sort of action around employment or relationships, or even just personal development.
mm,
And that there's actually, so some people prefer to kind of have, we don't give ourselves much permission to have like a philosophical conversation with ourselves. So sometimes I like to utilize the power of stories.
mm.
And this really wouldn't work for everyone, because some people I know are really uncomfortable with metaphors. And we could probably have a whole 1 hour discussion on how to help someone have a philosophical explore without getting too abstract. I like this particular exercise that I think I developed. There's probably other people doing similar things, but I was inspired by the story of Aladdin.
Mm,
And right, it's at least 200 years old. It's probably even older than that. It's almost certainly got like Syrian folk story origins. So Syria is a pretty ancient culture, right? So it's been around a long time, and I think it's still so popular across cultures that it must surely have something useful to spark a bit of, let's say, reflection.
mm,
So I ask people to imagine that they find themselves in a cave.
mm,
And if they can, to do a really nice breath and get their shoulders down and get comfortable as they imagine the cave. And as you grow accustomed to the gloom, I want you to cast your eyes around the cave. Think
mm,
about what the walls look like. And then realize that there in the corner, you've seen an ancient looking oil lamp. It's
mm,
grimy now, it's just dulled yellow and grey, but underneath it, there's the promise of maybe bronze or even gold. And so
mm.
you know the story, you know where this tale is going. So you're in your cave, you've seen the lamp, you know what comes next. So you walk yourself over to the lamp, you pick up the lamp, and because you know the story, you know what to do with it. You're going to give it a rub. And as you expect, the genie pops out. Only the genie doesn't offer three wishes in the conventional way. This time, the genie asks a slightly different question. The genie says, I can solve three problems for you. You just
Mm,
wish, and that problem will disappear. But there's some rules, because we know this
mm,
story, right? There's always got to be caveats, always a catch. One problem has to be for the you of today.
mm,
One problem has to be a problem for your family or your community, your people. And
mm.
the last problem has to be for the world.
Oh, wow.
And if you can think of these three problems you want solved and tell me what they are, I'll solve them. And then I find that if we sit and spend a bit of time, if the pressure to do something and decide what's important was so great. We knew that if we just had clarity about what we wanted for ourselves today, for our loved ones or our community, and for the world at large, that would tell us what's really important to us and the problems we really want to solve. From there, we just have to decide what steps we're going to take to be part of that solution.
But I think with your framework, it helps me to actually categorize everything and then put them in the right bucket and making sure that I don't miss anything.
Just do have a bit of a desire to be doing something useful in the world. I think that kind of brings me back to, I think earlier on you asked me, so what are the common stumbling blocks?
Yeah.
So if you kind of put aside that actually we don't give ourselves very much permission to ponder what our values would mean in action and what's really important to us in that big picture. We also, the early part of our lives, because again, humans are really complicated animals, right? You and I have said this lots of times before. We have a really complicated bit of kit up here. If it was a computer, it would be amazing. It would need a lot of tech support. And we treat it like it's nothing. We hardly ever service it, but actually it's really complicated. And what we need to do is sort of learn to drive it. We need to learn how to use the supercomputer in our skull. And when we're first born, when we're very first born, we're not even really in a fit state to be outside in the world. We have to be literally held and nurtured as if we were still inside for the first year. And it takes a really long time and actually quite a lot of people and quite a lot of input. And if you ask any parent, loads of money to get that that complicated human all the way to adulthood. And because so humans are like top of the food chain and they're living in the world successfully because we communicate and we collaborate and we use our fairly unusual brains. And learning to work a piece of kit that complicated, it takes time. So early on, it's essential that our parents, our teachers, our guardians, they pretty much tell us what to do.
Mm.
And our main driver is wanting to make them happy. As we become more mature and independent, there's like a handover process, isn't there, where our parents, whether they want to or not, kind of have to relinquish and cede more and more control. And then eventually we get to be solely in charge of ourselves. And thus far, most of the time, we've been highly rewarded for listening to others and doing what they advise us.
I think this is so true. And the handover process that you just mentioned, sometimes it is ignored. And people forgot that there is a handover process. So I assume that usually it's going to be when you're 18, right? You get kicked out of the house. You have to live your independent life. You go to university. But for a lot of people who, let's say, they stay with their parents, that handover process is in a very gray area, right? And they don't really realize that until they have to go to work. And I know a lot of people in some of the cultures where they stay with their parents until they get married, or even when they get married, they still stay with their parents, right? And they forget about what they truly want and what they need to do to make themselves happy.
And it should be gradual as well, but
Yeah.
actually a lot of the time especially at school,
Yeah.
I think across cultures, actually, even across different schooling systems in the world, there does seem to be a bit of a common theme, and it's incredibly well intentioned, I think.
Mm,
The grown-ups, the
mm,
government, the teachers, whoever decides the syllabus, they've thought about it. I'm not saying I always agree with what they think it's important for us to learn, because actually we don't get taught much about how our brains work or about emotional health or self-regulation as part of the curriculum, and I'd probably like to see more of that. But actually, I think on the whole, what they have to fill our brains with before we get to 16 or 18, it's well intentioned. They need us to know this stuff, and also they want us to measure what we're good at,
yeah.
and to come out with some bits of paper to prove to the world that that's what we're good at. And I never met a teacher yet, even if I didn't think they were brilliant. I've never met one who didn't really want to impart something they knew that they thought would be helpful. Their different ways of getting there might not always ring my bell, but I've never met a teacher who didn't want to say, look, I know a thing, and my desire is to, and what makes them happy is to share that wisdom with you.
Yeah.
But actually, in order to keep a couple of hundred young people between the ages of, say, for 11 and 16 or 11 and 18, safe and productive and moving from A to B without anything crazy happening, it has to be quite a controlled environment. So their
Mm,
opportunities to nurture independence, they're all around doing. So you get to be in charge of some quite cast iron things like your own school books or your own timetable or
yeah.
your own bringing your own lunch to school and keeping yourself hydrated and nourished. But actually, when it comes to the more philosophical, reflective things, what it means to be a good student is very much dictated. And then suddenly we're a grown up and it's like, have at it, pursue
Yes.
success.
Yeah. And actually, that really resonated with, I think, what we're going to come to next. We're going to come to two real life scenarios. So, actually, before this episode today, I got some questions from our community, and I would love to hear how you could approach these scenarios. So, the first scenario is a question from a young student, actually. And the question is, I'm a recent grad and I feel lost. The job market is really tough right now. Everyone keeps asking me, what do you want to do with your life? But I honestly don't know. How do I figure out what I really want? Mhm.
Who's everybody?
Mm, why do you want to ask that question?
Because everybody keeps asking me what I want to do with my life.
Right, got you.
Just want to check that they're in a place where they want to ask, what do I want to do with my life? Because actually, if they're doing something with their life and they're content for now, they're not going to be highly motivated. It might be that they have a different goal. Like, I've been at university studying, I'd like to just work at something for a while. I'd like to just earn
Mm,
some money for a while. I'd like to get to know myself outside of an academic setting for a while. And you might not be ready to choose what you want to do with your life. So I just would want to
yeah.
unpick who's everybody and are you in there? Because if you're not in the everybody, they don't get any
Mm.
lines in your play.
Does everybody include themselves as well? Because actually, is that their inner voice?
Yeah, because if it is, that's great. We should talk to them.
That is the key point, right? That is what they need to care about.
First thing I tend to ask is, what time frame of your life are you trying to decide for? I'd ask that young person to look at what is working for them right now.
Mm,
What does your day to day look like?
mm,
How is that working for you? And normally what we find is there's one or two facets that are already working. And it might be possible to simply cultivate a bit more of that. Ourselves a massive question. The question becomes really overwhelming.
from my own experience, probably you start thinking about what you are good at, what are your strengths, and
Indeed.
what do you like. It's just very simple. Like if you think about what are your personal values, all the big concepts and things like that, it can be quite overwhelming. I think the easiest questions can be, what do I like, right? And even if it's tough, then it's going to come back to your question. Obviously, you definitely have to think about the time frame, right? So what they trying to do in the next 3 or 5 years, let's say, if it is there's an opportunity and there's a job that they don't like doing, but that keep them going and kind of like give them the opportunity to learn the skills, then go with that. They lose 3 years of their life, they are young, that's not the end of the world. And well, as long as it's an acceptable job, right? If it's a job that they completely hate it, like every single day is a suffering day, then definitely I wouldn't recommend. But if it's a job that they can bear with, they can learn from it. It might be boring, but it gives them, the salary, the monthly salary, and also the opportunity to learn and explore things, then after 3 years or like 2 years or so, like they can switch to the job that they like. And hopefully during the first 2 or 3 years that they're doing the job that they don't like, they will be able to explore the job that they like. As you mentioned, we can have a lot of jobs in our life, so don't take one job as your forever job, for sure. And you wouldn't grow, you wouldn't change your preferences, your values, your priorities, even they wouldn't change over time, right? So the job we have are usually the one that's going to help us to accommodate what we value the most. So I think definitely like be open minded and just keep exploring, because we will not be able to know what we like and what we want if we just sit there and do nothing. So we have to do something, even if it's just finding out the things that we don't like. So we know, right? So we will not do it again next time. So do something to figure out what we like, I think.
We might not do that specific subject again next time, but what you said really flashed something else into my mind that I wanted to come back to. So first of all, I would want to whittle them down to, are you really choosing like for the rest of your existence? Or do we want to narrow down a time frame? Are you talking about you need to make a change in the next month?
Mm,
Next thing I would say is what you just described as the follow-up information about maybe sometimes graduates have committed to a degree, they've decided they're going to do it, and then they get to the end and actually very often with bright people doing something for 3 years is like, oh, I can't do that anymore. Right? Because they might yearn for a new adventure.
yeah.
They've already learned something about themselves. So what I might
Mm,
ask, because to me that's a pretty powerful thing they now know about themselves. I'd
mm,
say, so you discovered that you could do your degree, you were
mm,
competent in this subject, but now at the end of it, you're not feeling a passion for it,
mm,
but you made a commitment to finish it and you have.
mm,
I might invite them to ask what that tells them about themselves, or how I might ask
mm,
a bit more of a touchy-feely question. I might say, well, how do you feel about the fact that you made that commitment and you finished it? The other thing I've noticed that I was going to say is a common theme among particularly my younger clients
mm,
um, is this feeling that you can't make mistakes.
mm.
Or if you don't like something anymore, it must have been a mistake to do
Yeah.
it. So I might ask, did you like that subject, that degree? Was it interesting when you started? Because a fear of making mistakes can lead to us not making any action, taking any action at all. And
Interesting.
especially if we've just come out of the academic life, because actually at school and at university, many of the objectives are around passing the first time, understanding it immediately, getting a high score fast. When actually we know from, I think you'd say, not just the psychology, probably even from the neuroscience now, we know that when human beings make mistakes, that's when they get measurably smarter. What's the NLP expression? There is no failure, only feedback.
Amazing. Completely agree. Second scenario from a young professional. I keep saying I want to be healthier, but with my busy schedule, it never seems to stick. How do I get clarity about what I really want and actually make it happen? And I think we came across this scenario a couple of times doing our coaching, didn't we?
Yeah, including me. I think I came in wanting to be healthier and not being terribly specific about what that meant. What does healthier look like or feel like? I think it used to be more, it probably still is still more women we're bombarded with, particularly young women, with expectations around looking what society is currently classifying as healthy, which at different periods in history looks radically different. They can't all be healthy. For different people, obviously that's going to look different. So for women, I guess we're probably put under a lot of pressure on social media to look healthy. So I probably want to unpick what healthy means, but I don't think that's even just young women anymore. I think
Mm,
that increasingly young men are coming under pressure to look healthy, which might or might not be the same thing as feeling healthy or being able to live a life that a healthy body can live.
Yeah, I think definitely this is broader than just the look, right? I think it's not just people caring about how they look to other people, but it's also about how they feel about themselves. I know there's a lot of like careers or jobs that actually, for example, office job where you are really busy, you stick to your desk like for the whole day, right? And they do want to get healthier so they don't feel, laid back or they don't feel heavy, I think, by the end of the day.
I feel like you're asking me, do I come across this being very busy with their schedule, having work commitments to honor, for people, because sometimes even younger people have caring responsibilities, not always for their own children, but they might be helping out with other people's, or they might be looking after older parents. That's happening increasingly. Are these commitments an excuse for them not to be healthy?
Mm,
I think it's important for us to acknowledge. So it's been important for me as a professional, but I think it's important for anyone who's coming into a conversation to try and be more healthy, to acknowledge if realistically they have other demands that currently they have to meet. Because
mm,
there's too much scrolly, talky people telling us you've got to make time. We've all got the same 24 hours in a day. And it's not true. Some of us have to work more hours to earn enough money to live than
mm,
others. Some of us are remunerated far better than others, and we don't have to work as many hours. Some of
mm,
us have caring responsibilities.
mm,
Some of us live in parts of the world or parts of the country where their cost of living is higher, including the cost of accessing fitness.
mhm,
We don't all have the same 24 hours. We don't all have the same capacity to be physically healthy. For some of us, even to reach the best health that our body can give us, the best physical health that our body can achieve, will take longer and will have to be done more slowly and with more planning.
mm.
I think it's really important that we just acknowledge the truths of that.
What are the mini steps that they can do, very easy one that they can do straight away to solve this problem?
First thing I often do is ask them what is it that they want to be healthier for?
Mm,
What is it that their body isn't doing for them right now that they
mhm,
want it to do? Then ask them what would be a good first step
mm,
towards reaching. So let's say I'm only 23. I've started having to use like my hands to get up off the sofa. And when I get up out my desk chair, I go, oh. And I did it on a meeting the other day. I made a noise and I had to push upon the desk. And I thought, I can't be in this place already. I'm only young, but I've been sat at my desk for like 5 hours and I hadn't even got up. And so they were describing a situation where external demands had really hijacked them. There was another situation where I really unpicked and unthreaded and untangled a young lady who was taking incredible amount of responsibility. Like I am making excuses and I will go to the gym. And they were actually managing to go and they've been swimming and they were making improvements. We were on about the third coaching session and it turned out that they genuinely were working about 10 or 15 hours more a week than they
mm,
were contracted for, and that they didn't have any more hours in their life unless they wrestled some of those hours back from their employer.
mm,
Now, as it happened, they were quite culturally capitalized. They did have quite a good job, but they were very fearful of boundary setting so that they could take that time back. So they did do it actually. They spent a bit of time working out how they could make sure they were really delivering like what the changes they could make at work so they knew they were performing, and then that then gave them the confidence to say to their manager, actually this is all that I'm doing, this is how many extra hours it's taking. I'm really efficient. No one else could do it faster, so something has to change. And I'd appreciate you helping me with that. And they were really quite overjoyed to discover that in the face of that carefully evidenced plan that they've made in coaching, their manager was forced to go, oh. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's not actually okay, is it? Let's get on to that. So they kind of boss back and they boundary set. So in a really roundabout way, I'm kind of answering the question about, is it an excuse? Less often than you'd think. Genuine hurdles to getting more healthy, and sometimes they're not the ones you'd think they'd be.
Very powerful example. Thank you so much, Helen, for sharing. And if there's one thing that you would recommend our audience to do today, straight after this action, to figure out what they really want, what would that be?
Spend a little bit of time consulting their own internal compass.
Love it.
And I guess another more, perhaps so the other more, so at the beginning I used quite a story to explore what the internal compass, what direction it might point in. But there is actually a kind of more, a less abstract, more solid way of doing it. And that's to make a list of all of your stakeholders. So all of us have stakeholders in life, our boss, our mum, our dad, the people that we look after, our friends. Um,
Mhm.
and ask yourself, if all of those people were in the room, or I ask them, if all of those stakeholders were in the room with us right now, what would they tell us was the work we needed to do?
Mm-mm.
When they've outlined it, I think they'd tell me this, I think they'd tell me that. And then I would say, and if none of them were here, and whatever you chose to do next would not affect them at all, what if we gave them no votes at all? What's the work that we need to do? Very seldom, obviously it can happen that they're two completely different things. And then we know the first goal is really working out why there's such a big gap between the two.
Yeah.
But very often, things that we think would be good for our community or our family or the world, and things that we think would be good for us, there's a few shared goals in there. I'd say don't be afraid of the questions, because for every question that you ask yourself and every time the questions you ask yourself changes, you're getting closer to a clear sense of yourself. We can't work out what it is that we want until we've worked out who it is that we are.
Mm.
And that's what both of the exercises that I brought to the table today, that I think our listeners and watchers could use, is they can either think about if there were three problems in the world that they could solve, one for themselves, one for their community, and one for the world. Or they can sit down and work out what all the stakeholders want and then remove the stakeholders from the room and
Mhm.
see if the priorities change. Both of those activities are about working out who we are. Once we know who we are, what we want comes naturally.
So, guys, this is your invitation. Sometime today, please write down all those things that Helen just mentioned and spend some time with yourself and figure out what your internal compass is. Helen, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom today. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I hope that our audience also learned a lot from that as well. To everyone listening, I hope this conversation give you not just answers, but better questions, because often it is the question that lead us to the clarity that we're looking for. If today's talk really resonated with yourself and you would like to go deeper, Helen is offering a free discovery call. I will leave the details in the description, and you can also join our community to connect with Helen on there as well. This has been the Journey Note, the Real Talks. See you next time. Bye for now.
Thanks, Tao. Bye.